You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. We are talking Rose Bowl today. Ryan Day. It is the new era. Urban Meyer has retired. Has it sunk in for you? It's kind of interesting. I was watching the Rose Bowl, and, it wasn't until, third quarter, all of a sudden it started winding down, that it really started to hit me that this was Urban Meyer's last game as a head coach. And it's kind of strange considering, they were only bringing it up every 2 seconds. You'd think it would have, sunk in a little bit sooner, but it was really towards the end as the game started to wind down. It's like, oh yeah, this really is it for Urban Meyer. So look, there are several things I wanted to touch on today. I will say this, usually the episode after the Ohio State game, I usually have on Ross Fulton and Kirk Barton, and we recap what happened in the game. I'm not going to do that today. It's not that I don't want to talk about the game, but because of the strange, timing, obviously the game was played on a Tuesday, and there's so much going on, so much to talk about. I'm going to try to have Ross and Kirk on Monday instead of kind of recapping the game. I kind of want to do an overview of the season and look ahead a little bit, which I'm going to do that today on this show. I'm going to do a lot of looking ahead because there's a lot to talk about right now. But I would like to get Kirk and Ross's views on some things, talk a little bit about the coaching staff and what is probably in store for the program going forward. Obviously, speaking of other things going on, I hope that you listen to Johnny and Corey. The Scarlet and Great podcast is now here on the Unscripted Ohio feed. I hope you gave them a shot Thursday. Early Thursday, their first podcast was up and running. And if you have not listened to it already, I beg of you to go do that right after you're done listening to this, because these guys do a great job and it's bonus content. It will not be replacing Unscripted Ohio. It will be in addition to. So I hope you will enjoy those guys as much as I hope that you enjoy this show. Of course, you can catch us every Monday and Friday on Buckeye Grove, and you can catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and now Spotify. And Johnny and Corey will be posting the Scarlet and Great podcast typically every Tuesday or Wednesday on our feed. So it's just bonus content, more discussion about the Buckeyes. So the Rose Bowl, like I said, it was kind of weird. It just kind of got wound down, and it's like it hit, like a ton of bricks. Like, this is it for Urban Meyer. And, we've seen this before, and I think there are probably some people that are not overly sentimental about it because right or wrong, fair or, not, or, good, bad, or indifferent, there is a feeling or a sentiment that, Urban Meyer will wind up coaching again. I don't have that feeling. And even though it probably doesn't matter to Buckeye fans if he does or doesn't, maybe it does. I mean, I think some of you do care. You probably would be a little jealous in the back of your minds. There'd be a little jealousy and resentment there if he gets back into coaching. But I don't think it matters all that much to most of you. But there are some that it does. But I also think that some of you maybe, because you expect Urban to get back into coaching, I think it has taken away some of that nostalgia and some of the disappointment that this is coming to an end. But it's interesting to me because back in October and November, when the rumors really started to ramp up that this might be it for Urban, the mere suggestion of Ryan Day taking over kind of scared some of you. I think there were a lot of people that were excited. There was all the coach in waiting talk, and obviously that was never true. Ryan Day was never really the coach in waiting. But there was some expectation that maybe if Urban Meyer stepped aside, that he could, in fact, take over. And it's interesting from where we were in October to where we are right now, because I think if people had known in October that, yeah, this will be it for Urban Meyer, he'll be stepping down after the Rose Bowl, Ryan Day will be taking over, there's still a great deal of you that would have been freaking out and panicking about this. And it's nothing against Ryan Day. It's just, I think there's just so much unknown about him, and so much to be proven as to how he would adapt, react when taking over for Urban. But it's interesting because, not a lot of time has passed so far. Day, we're only in day number 2 of Ryan Day officially taking over, okay? Or, day number 3, I guess. We're 3 days into him officially taking over. And he's really only been handling the recruiting stuff for a couple of weeks. So we don't have a lot to draw from here. But I will tell you this. There has already been a major shift. And I know this because I see it every day on Twitter. I see it from you guys. There's a major shift in expectations and excitement level in the Ryan Day era. And for good reason. Look at what he's doing right now. Justin Fields is going to probably wind up being Ohio State's next quarterback. I know we could get in and discuss the Fields tape battle all we want. I'm going to forego the opportunity to get into that again. But I think Fields is going to be winding up starting for Ohio State when the season rolls around here in August and September. I think Justin Fields will wind up being the starter for a number of reasons. Like I said, we can get into that again at another time. But, Justin Fields probably going to be Ohio State's quarterback here. That could be official any day now. Like, from what I understand is, I'm not going to say it's a done deal, but paperwork has been sent in. It's a matter of him getting, officially approved, admitted into the Ohio State University. And if everything goes smoothly, he could get up and running here, if not by the start of classes on Monday, then within a couple of days of that. He has actually up to 2 weeks. There's a 2-week period when classes start where you can drop, change, add classes. And that 2-week period, from what I understand, also applies to incoming students. So he could actually theoretically start class later than when they get running on Monday. So Justin Fields, you look at right there off the bat. If Dwayne Haskins does in fact declare for the NFL draft, Ryan Day starts off with the new quarterback, a 5-star talented guy who could potentially get a waiver and then be eligible for this fall. That's the other thing I should probably point out. I'm talking about Justin Fields being the starter for the 2019 season. Technically speaking, he still has to get a waiver for that to happen because he's not immediately eligible when he transfers. He is going to need a waiver from the NCAA. I think he's going to get it, but it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. It's not a 100% thing. So I should add the asterisk, the qualifier here, that when I say I think Justin Fields will be the starter, technically speaking, he has to get a waiver for that to happen. But we'll address that at another time. But, having a quarterback like him to potentially take over for Dwayne Haskins if he declares for the NFL draft, which we're still waiting to see if that happens. It's expected that he will, but we've seen shockers before. Stranger things have happened. Is he a guy that, maybe he values other things than just where he'll be drafted in the draft? Does he value his experience at Ohio State? Does he want to come back and break records? Does he want to come back and win a national title under Ryan Day? These are all questions that will have to be answered. But assuming Haskins goes, okay, and assuming Justin Fields gets his waiver, that's a couple of ifs there. Day starts off with a quarterback. Well, look what else has happened, okay? We've got Jordan Fuller announcing on Thursday that he's returning. So you've got Jordan Fuller back. You've got Malik Harrison saying on Wednesday of this week that he is returning. So you've got Jordan Fuller and Malik Harrison back. 2 potential stalwarts on the defensive side of the ball. Malik Harrison made a big jump here the second half of this season. He's still got to be more consistent, but man, with another year under his belt, he's got an opportunity to be really good. He's got a chance to take what we thought we would see out of Jerome Baker and take it one step further. And Baker is having a great career so far, starting off in Miami. And so he's got talent, but we didn't see the consistency from Baker at Ohio State. And I think with Harrison returning, he's got a chance to do that. You've got probably Michael Jordan, it appears, will be coming back and shifting back to guard. We're still waiting on Haskins. We're still waiting on KJ Hill. Damon Arnett said he was leaning towards going pro, but he hasn't made a decision. But I got to tell you what, though. Jeffrey Okudah and my guy Allen, he coined this phrase on Twitter, Okudah Matata. It's a wonderful phrase. He is going to be a stud next year. He's going to be a beast. Jeffrey Okudah is going to be, I think, another in a long line of really good corners for Ohio State. And, we were kind of waiting, with anxiety this year to see whether or not, Damon Arnett would take that step, whether, Kendall Sheffield would take that step. And those guys never really did. Maybe Arnett comes back and he has a chance to take that. But Shaun Wade and Jeffrey Okudah, I think, are going to be two shutdown corners for Ohio State. So the defense is it's in the makings of being really good. Remember, there are guys like Josh Proctor waiting in the wings. Brendan White stepped up in the second half of the season and played really well. Had another good game against Washington. Kevon Pope and Tirada Mitchell. There are plenty of guys here that Ohio State can count on. I think Baron Browning is going to take another step in his development. You've got that defensive line, which is really, really deep. So many great defensive tackles. You got Chase Young, could step up his game and be an All-American at defensive end. Tyler Friday, Tariq Smith. I mean, the list goes on. The defense here for Ohio State is in position with Fuller and Harrison coming back especially. And we'll wait and see on Arnett. But that defensive backfield and the linebackers having a chance to improve a lot from what we saw this past season. It could be a really good defense. And a lot of that is going to depend on what happens as, with these coaching changes, right? We're waiting to see what happens here. And I think there will be a lot of changes. You've got, we know for sure very little right now. But as of Thursday night, it looks like Alex Grinch is probably going to take the defensive coordinator position at Oklahoma. I've been saying for a couple weeks, I think Greg Schiano is on his way out. I mentioned it last week on the podcast. If you listen to his interviews, he sure talked like a guy that was planning to leave. So you've got Schiano and Grinch that you need to replace. There are rumors out there about bringing in Al Washington, who was the linebackers coach at Michigan. This is a guy that played at BC when Day was there. He's a young, energetic guy that recruited really well for Michigan this past year. He's almost single-handedly the reason Michigan was in on Zach Harrison there for a while. Washington is an Ohio guy. He played high school in Columbus at Watterson High School. I think he's a guy that could step in at linebackers coach. They'd be looking for a defensive coordinator. Might it be Marcus Freeman from Cincinnati? Matt House is a name who really is starting to pick up steam. He's a defensive coordinator at Kentucky. He's a Michigan State guy, worked his way up, doing really, really well. A lot of people love the kind of coordinator and the job he did there in Lexington. So there are a lot of names, and obviously it's going to depend on who Ohio State brings in as to the success of the defense this year. But I think with the changeover, if in fact Schiano is on his way out, if in fact Grinch is on his way to Oklahoma and Bill Davis is on his way out, Ohio State will bring in some new blood on defense, and the talent is there. And I think maybe just the shuffle, just the change of scenery, and bring in some new guys and a new mentality, we could see a return of the Silver Bullet defense. So let's see what happens. It looks like Grinch to Oklahoma is either really close to being a done deal. If it's not, and you might be listening to this, and the news may have already broke that that's going to happen. We'll see what happens there. I think Schiano is out, and I think Grinch will take that job with Oklahoma, and I think Bill Davis is out as well. So defense, long story short, look out for next year, and whoever takes over this defense as defensive coordinator, it's like, getting handed the keys to the Mercedes. And I know, Ryan Day technically had the keys handed over to a Mercedes, but I got to say this, back in November, I said it earlier, you guys didn't necessarily think that was a good thing. It's nothing against Ryan Day. It's just, this is Urban Meyer. He's a legendary Hall of Fame coach. And, these things don't always turn out. We've had so many coaches and talented coaches in waiting, or talented young coaches take over for legends, and they're big shoes to fill. It doesn't always work, and it may not work out for Ryan Day. But I'm just saying there is a lot of growth with this program, potentially. I think, with the recruiting already having some momentum back a little bit and some excitement level with Day taking over, I got to like where this program is at, and I think it is heading in the right direction. Okay, so we discussed the defensive side of the ball, and there are a bevy of changes that could still happen on the defense. And we don't know a lot about who's going to be manning the fort, so to speak. And even though the personnel is starting to take shape, obviously with a bunch of different coaching moves that can happen or probably will happen, there's just not a lot known on the defensive side of the ball. Despite the fact that the personnel seems to be taking shape. But the offensive side of the ball is interesting because we know who's going to be coaching now. We know it looks like that Kevin Wilson, although it hasn't been officially announced, Kevin Wilson will be now what's basically being termed the run game coordinator and co-offensive coordinator. And Mike Yurcich, who is the new name here in the fold, he is coming to Ohio State from Oklahoma State. Now, this is the guy that interests me because, and let me first, I want to preface this discussion because there's something I got to get off my chest here. You're going to, if you meander about on the the depths of the internet and you start looking for Oklahoma State fans, and I know they might be tough to find out there because there's probably not that many of them. But if you start searching for Oklahoma State message boards and you are curious at their take at Yurcich as an offensive coordinator there at Oklahoma State, you're going to be disappointed because you're going to find out, for whatever reason, they didn't like this guy. And look, you can't really put your finger on the pulse as to why, because you ask 10 different Oklahoma State fans, why didn't you like Yurcich? You're probably going to get 10 different reasons. And that's not an indictment against Oklahoma State fans. That's really just an indictment against Ohio State, it's really an indictment against everybody. And I was about to say Ohio State fans, and the reason being is because Ohio State fans are guilty of it too. Think back to 2014. I promise you, if you go back into the archives and find past discussions and people that were on Twitter in 2014 or message boards in 2014, look at the discussions that were being had about Tom Herman. I promise you, when Herman left, it really was a thing where people didn't appreciate Herman when he was here. People didn't like Herman when he was here. Some people did. There were a lot of people that loved Tom Herman, but there were a lot of people that did not like Tom Herman as an offensive coordinator. And I don't even want to bring in, we're not talking about what's happened here in the past year with Tom Herman, the snitch, and Tom Herman, the arrogant weasel. We're not talking about, strip club Tom. We're talking about Tom Herman, offensive coordinator, as Ohio State fans remember him from 2014. But in 2014, remember, back in 2013, oh my gosh, the Michigan State Big Ten championship. People were, I know Urban Meyer has since taken some blame for part of what happened in that game, but man, people were furious with Tom. And in 2014, I don't think people really cared for him that much until the end of the season. It wasn't until Ohio State beat Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship by a ton. And breaking news, Ohio State scores again against Wisconsin. That may have gotten to 159-0 at this point. It wasn't until after that game, and then of course that magical playoff run, Ohio State beating Alabama and Oregon in consecutive games. It wasn't until then, and especially until the following season when Tim Beck and Ed Warner took over the offense, that people really said, "Oh yeah, maybe Tom Herman was really a big deal." As Tom Herman, the quarterback's coach, and Tom Herman, the coordinator. And so, when I look at Oklahoma State fans not liking Yurcich, I say, well, that sounds familiar. Because remember, Iowa State fans did not like Tom Herman either. You got the same kind of feedback from Iowa State fans when Herman took the job and went to Ohio State as you're getting now with Oklahoma State fans with Yurcich. Oh, Iowa State fans hated Tom Herman. They were glad to see him go, or so they tell you. That's just the knee-jerk fan reaction. Anywhere you go, people don't like their coordinators. That's just, I never understand it. I guess it's just because play calling is so subjective and it feels so results oriented. If a play works, you're a genius. If a play doesn't work, you're the GOAT, and not a good way. So this is really not unique to Oklahoma State fans, but Yurcich isn't very well liked. And Ohio State fans, so if you're scouring the internet and trying to talk yourself into being excited, don't go seeking out Oklahoma State fans here, because it's not going to work. You're not going to see glaring reviews and or glowing reviews, and you're not going to see fireworks, and people going in a state of depression because he's leaving. That's not how they feel about him. But I wouldn't read anything into it. And I looked at this guy's stats, and I can't say I watched Oklahoma State a ton this year, because I really didn't. I've seen him a few times here the past couple of years, and I've not seen anything that makes me cringe about his play calling. He's going to be the pass game coordinator, by the way. And I know some of you are asking, well, what the heck does that mean? And basically it means is, if you assume Kevin Wilson is the run game coordinator, that just means he is throughout the week going to prepare the offense for what they will face against the opposing run defense, and vice versa. You're going to see Yurcich prepare Ohio State for the pass game, and that means he will break down film for what teams do against the pass. And then, of course, they will collaborate, and that's when, throughout the week, Ohio State will come up with the game plan. And it's still not really been decided who exactly is calling the plays. Is it Yurcich? Is it Wilson? Is it going to be Day? It's possible Day could call the plays as head coach. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. We still don't know those details yet, but we know for sure that Yurcich will be a co-offensive coordinator. He will take care of the passing game, and it looks like Wilson will take care of the run game. But when I watch Oklahoma State, from what I could see of them, nothing really stands out to me. I didn't watch enough to get a sense of tendencies, and does he go conservative? Does he get too cute? Those are all things I would need to see more to feel comfortable about. But what I can do, and what I did do, is I just looked at the stats. What are the numbers telling me? And I'll tell you this, in 6 seasons as coordinator, I can tell you that 5 of those 6 seasons, his offenses finished in the top 20 in the country in S&P Plus offensive efficiency. And some of you are asking, what the heck is S&P Plus? And basically, it's a metric that goes back and takes play-by-play data and examines a number of factors based on field position and how many big plays you had, and where you took over, how efficient your offense was, how many times it scored on a per possession and per play basis. It takes all these factors and basically aggregates them based on percentage of the national average, and it just uses those factors and then puts it on a scale of 1 to 100 how good your offense was. And I can tell you, in 5 of the 6 seasons under Yurcich as offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State, they finished in the top 20 in the country in S&P Plus efficiency. And 3 of those 6 years, they were top 10. They actually finished 7th this year in the entire country. They were number 7 in offensive efficiency. So what that tells you is, and I know some of you will say, well, they were facing Big 12 defenses. that's fair. I think that you have to at least take that into consideration. But I will also point out that 5 out of 6 years they've been a top 20 offense. 3 out of 6 years they've been a top 10 offense, despite the fact that they're not bringing in 4 and 5 star talent routinely. I mean, they're getting mostly 3-star guys, and they're having really good offensive efficiency with lesser talent. So you put this guy, I think, in a system with Ohio State, and suddenly you put talent around him, a Justin Fields at quarterback, or J.K. Dobbins at running back, Garrett Wilson at wide receiver, Chris Olave at wide receiver, Ben Victor, Austin Mack, Jeremy Ruckert at tight end. You start going down the line, Jamison Williams at wide receiver. There's a lot of playmakers and a lot of talent that Yurcich is going to have at his disposal. So I like this hire. I really do. I think he's going to work out well. I think he has the pedigree. You go back into his career. This is a great story. Remember, this guy came from Division II. Mike Gundy plucked him out of Division II. He went online and just found the guy and hired him. I mean, it's a crazy story. It's an awesome story. It's a feel good story. But this guy has the chops. I think he has the knowledge, and I think he's going to be very successful. As to his recruiting, we don't know. I can't say I know what kind of recruiter he is because he was recruiting at Oklahoma State, and I just said a minute ago he was doing this with 3-star talent, which kind of you could construe that with a negative connotation. Well, he didn't recruit very well, but he was recruiting to Oklahoma State, so we just don't know what he'll be like as a recruiter. But I think the offensive talent is there. So changing gears on the offensive side of the ball, one thing I really want to talk about is Greg Studrawa, because I was watching this Rose Bowl, and folks, I tell you what, I really can't tell you enough how much I think Studrawa this year has gotten an unfairly bad rap from Ohio State fans. Because I was thinking about this, Washington is a team that is a really good defense. They play zone, mostly zone. They don't blitz a ton. Remember, they were talking in the first half, so how many times on the broadcast were they talking about, Washington has blitzed? And actually that wasn't accurate because they actually did blitz on one of those plays, but they were called for offsides. It was a free play. So at that time that they did blitz, they wound up getting called for a penalty, so it didn't officially count, but they actually had blitzed on that particular play. But they're a team that plays really good zone defense, and they just were not – they were trying to get pressure from their front four, from their 3-man rush and 4-man rush, and they were hoping to rattle Dwayne Haskins enough to make him throw it a little bit earlier into that zone coverage and maybe confuse him, and maybe he'd overthrow or underthrow something, and that kind of thing leads to interceptions in a zone defense. But it didn't happen. Ohio State kept Dwayne Haskins clean. They kept him from pressure. He continued to sit back in the pocket in the first half. He was picking apart the Washington zone. What happened? Because Haskins was doing so well against that zone defense, Washington eventually had to scrap their game plan, and they started coming after him in the second half. And it did work. They had to bring a lot of pressure, but they were getting to him, and I think it disrupted the Ohio State offense a little bit. I don't think Ohio State got conservative in that game, by the way. I think they just kind of got out of rhythm. I don't think they let their foot off the gas. I don't think they got conservative. I think Washington just changed their approach, and bringing the blitzing, it just changed the rhythm a little bit, and Ohio State just got out of rhythm. That's what I felt anyway. I mean, some of you may see that differently, but I didn't think they got conservative. But so where I want to bring this around to the point I'm trying to make here. I really felt, if you look at this season as a whole, whenever you have a quarterback throw for 50 touchdown passes and only a handful of interceptions and throw for nearly 5,000 yards as he did, if to throw for all the yardage he did, not 5,000, but about 4,000 yards. When you look at all these stats that he put up this year, it's really incredible. And I attribute this to, if you go to a Michigan message board and see what they were saying about Dwayne Haskins, they were envious at how the Buckeye offensive line kept Dwayne Haskins clean all year long. And I think this is where Studrawa gets a bad rap, because the Ohio State offensive line, it was inconsistent from a running standpoint. But I tell you what, for them to protect Haskins as well as they did this year, Haskins does not put up those kind of numbers if he doesn't have a great offensive line in front of him. And I'm not taking anything away from Haskins. I think he is legitimately a great passer. Last year he was a thrower. This year he turned in and blossomed into a great passer. But he was given that opportunity by an offensive line that outside of maybe Penn State, I thought Penn State was the only game they did not protect him very well. But outside of maybe the Penn State game, I thought the pass protection for Ohio State all year long was simply astounding. And this is why I think Studrawa as a coach probably deserves more credit than he got. I think there were some concerns, especially the first half of the year, with how Ohio State was running the ball, and maybe that falls on Studrawa a little bit. There are a lot of reasons for that. Remember, teams were stacking the box. They weren't getting any run efficiency out of Dwayne Haskins. He wasn't able to, defense did not have to honor his feet. Maybe there's some scheme in there. The offensive coordinators, maybe Ryan Day takes a little bit of flack for that. Maybe Kevin Wilson takes some flack for that. I think it's scheme. I think it's execution. I think it's stacking the box. There are a lot of reasons for it. So it's not just falling on Studrawa, but early in the year, the run game was simply not as effective as it needed to be. But really, the second half of the year, the last 3-4 games especially, I thought since the Maryland game, Ohio State really ran the ball the last 4 games. They ran the ball a lot better, a lot more like they needed to. They were efficient with the run game. Again, I think Studrawa deserves credit for that. I think the pass protection, as I said, was not just good, but it was great all year. So it's looking like Greg Studrawa will be back as Ohio State offensive line coach next year. And I got to say, I think that's a good thing. There is one concern that I would have, and it's Greg Studrawa, the recruiter. How will he recruit? This is a slight issue because, ideally, you want your position coaches recruiting the guys that they're going to be coaching in college. You establish a rapport, you establish a relationship. You want them to be effective recruiters so that you can have that relationship when they get there. And Studrawa, at least on paper, has been a so-so recruiter. I mean, it's hard to differentiate sometimes. I don't think so all the time we can actually tell who's really good recruiter because, there's so many variety of factors that go into recruiting, and you have a small sample when you start trying to boil it down to position by position. So it doesn't always necessarily tell the real story of how a guy is recruiting, but you want to have a guy recruiting his position well. You want him to be effective as a recruiter. You can cover up some recruiting mistakes. You can have the head coach lean on a recruit at that position a little bit more. You can sometimes have another offensive coach, maybe the coordinator, take over instead of the position coach. But when push comes to shove, you'd ideally like to have every single position coach be a good recruiter because that helps establish relationships. And that is my one criticism, I think, for Studrawa. As a recruiter, the jury is definitely still out. He needs to improve. But as a coach, when we're talking about fundamentals and improvements, remember they had to replace Billy Price this year. It's not like he took over an offensive line that should have been, really good right out of the box. So they had to improve, and they did. And I think Greg Studrawa has done a great job. It doesn't mean he's a finished product. It doesn't mean that we go in next year thinking, all problems are solved. But I think Ohio State, with Michael Jordan moving back to guard, Thayer Munford coming on, Wyatt Davis coming on, I think next year Ohio State's offensive line is going to be very good. If Justin Fields is the quarterback, or if somehow Dwayne Haskins returns, they're going to have a great quarterback back there. Plenty of receivers to throw to. We still, like I said earlier, we'll wait on KJ Hill, but it looks like Austin Mack will be back. Ben Victor should be back. You add in guys like Garrett Wilson, who, by the way, I think I've said this before. I think Garrett Wilson is going to be an absolute star at Ohio State. You throw these guys in, and the offense is suddenly looking very, very good. So that's the offensive side of the ball. So we covered the defense, we covered the offense. We will get into more about what has happened this year and this season. We will talk more Ryan Day on Monday. As I said, I want to get Ross Fulton and Kirk Barton on the podcast. I would like to break down what they feel about this coaching transition, because it is interesting. Like I said, it didn't really hit me until the Rose Bowl that this was Urban Meyer's last game. But Ryan Day is now the head coach. Plenty to talk about. We will continue to monitor transfers. Justin Fields, does he become official? We will continue to monitor comings and goings. KJ Hill waiting on his decision, waiting on the decision officially whether or not Michael Jordan is returning, although it sounds like he will. Damon Arnett is still out there as well, and of course Dwayne Haskins. So we'll talk all about that, coaching changes, everything else. Ross Bolton on Monday. We will get into plenty more topics to discuss in the next couple weeks.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So basketball fans, Ohio State basketball is back in action on Saturday at noon. That is over at Value City Arena in the Jerome Schottenstein Center. This is a huge matchup for Ohio State. Remember, they are already 2-0 in the Big Ten. Michigan State is 3-0 in the Big Ten. Michigan State is ranked number 8 in the AP poll, and Ohio State is number 14. So this is a top 15 showdown. In a lot of ways, this is a little bit similar to last year. If you remember, Ohio State kicked off its Big Ten season, or re-kicked off its Big Ten season, in January of last year with a big home win over number 1 Michigan State. It's kind of funny. I actually think this is a bigger test for Ohio State this year than that test was last year. And the reason I say that is, even though Michigan State came into that game number 1, they were winning games, but they were kind of struggling at the time. They were reeling just a little bit. They were inconsistent, kind of up and down. And if you remember, they kind of had a sluggish start to the Big Ten and wound up, really picking it up in the middle of January, late January, early February. They started to hit their stride and play a lot better. But that Michigan State team that Ohio State beat, remember, they thumped them by 22 points. It was a rout from the get-go. After the first couple of minutes, I think Ohio State went on a run, took the lead, if I remember correctly, with about 6 or 7 minutes into the first half. And then really from there, they got going and they put on an insane run, went up by 12 at halftime, and then really throttled Michigan State in the second half. But this Michigan State team, as I said, they are 3-0 in the Big Ten, and I got to say they are playing really, really good basketball. Whereas last year they were the number 1 team in the country. They didn't really look like it, but this year they're number 8, and they're playing a lot more like, if not the best team in the country, maybe Duke or Kansas right now. Despite their loss to Arizona State, Duke or Kansas may be number 1 team in the country, but Michigan State is right up there. They're playing a lot better than they did against Kansas there to open up the season. This is a tough game for Ohio State, and I think that as much as the scenarios are similar to last year, this is really going to be a difficult challenge. And the thing that concerns me the most about this game is the last 3, 4, 5 games, I've really been kind of disappointed with Ohio State's transition defense. Their half-court defense continues to be acceptable. It's a top 15 defense right now in terms of points per possession, but they really have been kind of flimsy and inconsistent, giving up quick transition points. And this is a game in Michigan State. The Spartans will make them pay if they are not attentive. After scoring points, especially, or not grabbing a rebound, Michigan State will get up the floor in a hurry. So this is a really big test for Ohio State to shut down Michigan State's transition game. And don't get me wrong, it's going to be a difficult task shutting down their half-court game as well. But their transition game is especially where they're lethal. And, last year, one matchup I liked in this game was I thought Caleb Weston did a really good job on Nick Ward on both ends. He was able to score on Ward, which is tough because, big guy, long arms, really good shot blocker. I thought Weston did a great job on him last year, but he did a really good job defensively as well. Ohio State really shut Ward out of the game, and they did not allow the Spartans to play through him, and that's going to be another key here. I like where this Ohio State team is at. They've just got to be more consistent offensively, and like I said, the transition defense has got to get better. Look, normally you would say, when you're playing a top 10 team, even at home, you can understand a loss and you can kind of live with the loss. The way this Michigan State team is playing right now, they just throttled Northwestern by about 30 points the other night. You can look at this game objectively and say, well, okay, if Ohio State loses even at home, not a big deal, not the end of the world. And it's really not. But here's the thing, because it is at home and because the Big Ten is so exceptionally deep this year, you can't afford to lose many home games. So even though Ohio State is in a situation where they're facing a top 10 team, because it's at home, they're kind of backed into a corner where you really, really want to see them win this game, especially if you're thinking in terms of, can this team win a Big Ten title? You've got Michigan and Michigan State right now, I think, are just in a half a category above Ohio State and Indiana. Iowa's 0-3 in the Big Ten, which is really kind of a tough break because they've had a terribly tough schedule so far. Wisconsin goes down to Minnesota at home. So there are a few tiers kind of breaking out in the Big Ten, and I think Ohio State is in that second tier with a couple of other teams. Indiana, Nebraska, I think, come to mind, although Nebraska's off to kind of a bad start as well. But I really like Michigan State, and I think Ohio State can be right there with them, but they've got to get better, and to do that, they've got to win these home games early in the Big Ten. If they want to win the league, this is the kind of game that they have got to win. So big game here for the Buckeyes. Ohio State, Michigan State, noon on Saturday. If you're in the Columbus area, if you haven't gotten tickets already, there's a few available. You should rush out and go over and support the Buckeyes because this will be a huge game, a huge atmosphere. This is your chance to root on Ohio State as it attempts to go 3-0 in the Big Ten. Of course, just one loss on the season, so a top 15 showdown over at the Shot. That'll wrap things up for today. As I said, please be on the lookout for the Scarlet and Gray podcast every week. You can now catch Johnny Lunsford and Corey Thompson as they host the Scarlet and Gray podcast. You can find that here on the Unscripted Ohio feed, which, of course, is on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and now Spotify. You can catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast every Monday and Friday on any of your mediums of choice. Please find, follow, rate, review, subscribe, do all that jazz. And we are on Buckeye Grove every Monday and Friday. That's going to do it for me. Catch me on Twitter at KYLAM8. Everybody, we'll be back on Monday, hopefully with Ross and Kirk, to break down Ohio State, the season at large, the 2018 season, what they thought of Urban Meyer, the transition to Ryan Day, and what happens going forward. And, of course, we will also talk about the Buckeyes' hopefully victory against Michigan State, but we'll talk about the Spartans and Buckeyes either way. So stay tuned. We'll be back on Monday, everybody. Have a great weekend. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.